But what I'm going to do today is put a reverse camera onto my Land Cruiser 80 Series. So when you've got a large 4x4 like this here and it's stacked up to the roof with stuff that you put inside because you've been camping for 2 or 3 weeks, it's really difficult usually to see out of the back window. There's a couple of issues with this. One is that when you're reversing in relatively tight spaces, you can't see what's behind you. In a campsite, that can be dangerous because there can be kids running around and so on. Another difficulty is when you're driving, you can't see the traffic behind you very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this camera. And my intent is to use this camera not just as a reversing camera, which is typically what it's used for, but to also use it as a rear view when I'm traveling on the road. You can buy these cameras off AliExpress, you can buy them off eBay. There are a plethora of different options. I'm sure you've been shopping online and you would know where to buy one of these. But why this particular camera? Well, there are a hell of a lot of options out there. For me, the main thing was that I should get something with a wide angle view, number one, and number two, that it should be relatively robust, and number three, it should be waterproof. So as with any online purchase, I went and I looked at the reviews, and this looked like a pretty good camera, got pretty decent reviews. And for the price, I think it's probably worth the risk, but I do expect that it's going to work. We'll see how that goes with time. So where to attach this camera? Of course, you can attach it anywhere on the rear of the car where it's not going to interfering with the functioning of the different bits at the back of the car, like the tailgate and the steering wheel and so on. And also you must have a good range of unobstructed view. The other thing you need, of course, is electrical power supply. So you need to be able to get electricity to it fairly easily. And then you need to be able to run the cables, which are the visual cables in this case, through into the car and along the cable rack, wherever you choose to run it, through to a screen that you will have in the front of the car, viewable by the driver. So where am I going to attach this? Well, there's a couple of things I want. I want, of course, a clear view. And secondly, I want to be able to see the ground as well. So I want to be able to see the ground behind me when I'm reversing. And I want to be relatively close to the ground, and the reason being that if I'm reversing in a place where there's rocks and so on, so you're not always reversing in a campsite. You know, sometimes you get into a situation where you've got to turn around because you're on a 4x4 track or whatever, and it's just become difficult to navigate. And so you want to turn around, for example, and you've got to reverse, and you can't see what's behind you, especially if you don't have an extra driver to help you, or if you're in a place where you can't get out of the car because there are dangerous wildlife, for example. So I've decided to be a bit lazy. I am going to attach this camera right on top of my trailer power output over here. Now, I don't use a trailer, never. I don't expect to use a trailer anytime in the future. And if I had a trailer on, in any case, I wouldn't be able to use the rear view camera unless it was above the trailer and I could see over the roof of the trailer. But then that would defeat the purpose of being able to see the ground close to the rear of the car. The nice thing about this position as well is that there is already a set of wiring running through for the trailer lights and so on, and so I'm going to take advantage of that. So normally, if you wanted to use this as a reversing camera, you would attach the power to the reverse lights. That way when you engage reverse gear, you get power to the camera and you can see what's behind you. In my case, I want to use this as a rear view camera, so I'm going to attach it to the tail light power supply. The reason I'm attaching it to tail light power supply is that I can easily switch on the camera just by switching on the headlights. So I can switch on the headlights at any time of day, in the daytime, in the nighttime, whatever the case might be. And if I want to reverse, I can switch the headlights on and look at the camera if it's in the daytime and I don't have the camera on anyway. So what comes with this camera is a set of cables, and you'll see here there's a red cable, which is the power cable, and the yellow cable, which is going to transfer the visual signal to the screen, which I'm going to install in front in the car. I want to indicate at this point that I bought the camera and the screen separately. So they're two separate purchases. I could have done it with a package purchase as well, but in this case it was just cheaper to buy the camera on its own and the screen on its own. And you know, it's just that there was a good online deal for the screen by itself and the camera by itself. What you've got then is this cable here, which will be your power cable, and you simply got to insert that into there like that, and that there must then be connected to your power source. And the power source, like I said earlier, is going to be the set of tail lights. Let's start by installing the power source. Now, to get one of these off, all you need really, depending on how it's bolted on, in my case it's just a little bolt that's got an Allen key head, and there's a nut at the back, so Allen key, little spanner, and that should come quite easily. Okay, still a bit sticky there towards the end, but it's relatively easy to take that off. All you need is the right set of tools, and it's a minute's job. So now that we've got this baby loose, the next thing of course is just to get this fitting out so that we can have access to the wiring itself. Just push that through there. It's got a little clip that holds it on. Really simple, just a little bit of pressure with your thumbs and that pushes right through. Now to figure out what is the power source that goes to tail light, well, obviously if you just look at the wiring diagram, in my case I've never used this on the trailer, so I'm not 100% sure if everything is in the right place. So what I'm going to do then is just grab a multimeter, put on the headlights so I've got power coming here, and check where there is a positive voltage. So multimeter is a great piece of equipment to have. It's something that will help you to troubleshoot or identify almost all of your electrical problems. Of course, most electrical problems are to do with the wiring rather than anything else, but the thing about a multimeter is it can tell you, or it can help you to find out which wire is not getting current or not getting power, instead of you having to physically trace and look for every fault. And of course, in a situation like this where I want to find out where the power is going to when I do something on the switches in the front, then all I'm going to do is connect this up and then test and see where the voltage is coming from. So I'm going to go switch on the headlights so that I've got some power coming over to the tail lights, and then we can see where the power is going to. Okay, so lights on, I can see that over here, and all I've got to do now is switch on my multimeter and check the voltage. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is locate the earth, which is normally the black cable coming into here. I don't know who wired this car and whether the wire coloring is correct, but I'm going to assume to start with that is correct. So that basically should be my ground or earth, depending on what you want to call it. And normally the power will go to the red cable in the case of the tail light, but let's just check that out. Okay, and there you have it. It says 11.15 volts, but I'm going to assume that is the 12 volt power supply. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is get my power cable in there, and then I can connect that up and put it onto the camera. So that's a fair amount of cable. That's probably more than I need. Well, actually it is more than I need, but I'm not gonna skimp on the cable. Of course, once you cut the cable, it's difficult to lengthen it again. Well, not difficult, but it's irritating. It's a bit more effort. So I'm gonna keep it at its original length. And for stripping the ends there, ideally you should have the right tool, so you can use a cable stripper, for example. That's a nice piece of kit to have. Always very handy. With a bit of practice, of course, just a set of side cutters is as easy and as effective as well. So the first thing I notice is that the cable is really fine. So it's a really thin gauge cable, and that's not ideal, but you know, I guess you get what you pay for, and this is a relatively cheap camera. In fact, it is a cheap camera, so I'm not expecting it to be top of the range. Anyway, that should be sufficient. We're not talking about really significant currents in this case here. This is a really small electronic piece of kit, and I don't expect that it's going to require a lot of power to run it. So interestingly, the box that this comes in and the instruction manual, which is just a single sheet of paper about 5 by 8 centimeters, does not indicate how much power is required to, or how much power this camera consumes. All it says is that it uses a range of 10 to 15 volts. Now, we don't know how much power, but like I said, it's a relatively small piece of electronic equipment, and I don't expect it to use a significant amount of power. Therefore, I don't expect there to be significant current flowing through these wires. So this gauge should be more than sufficient. And now to connect it up. Now, I would normally try to terminate this properly, but in this case we're working with a relatively small area here. So I'm just going to attach these wires straight onto there. The ideal thing, of course, is to solder those together as well, but I don't have a soldering gun, and we're in the lockdown right now. There's no chance of me going out to get one. So I'm just going to attach these wires together and chuck them back in and screw them on, and that should work. And at some point in the future I might have to come back, take this off again, and solder them properly in so that they don't come loose at some stage in the future, and just tighten those in properly, and hopefully it all functions. Right, and there you go. So now that is connected in there. It's not ideal, like I've said, but given the circumstances, it's COVID-19, all the rest of it, we're on lockdown. I can't really go out and get a soldering iron to properly solder those together. And I also can't fit a normal termination on there, so I'm just going to work it as it is. Just to illustrate what I mean by properly terminating it, you normally use one of these. Of course, there are a number of other options. This would fit into there quite easily without any issues. But the problem here is that this here has to fit in, and then you've got to put this whole assembly back onto its mounting, and there isn't a lot of play there. One option, of course, would be to just try and cut through that, but that comes with its own problems too. So I'm going to go the easy route here and just proceed as is. The next thing to do is to check if we're actually getting power, and I'm going to do that by switching the lights on, putting the multimeter on, and I can identify immediately whether I'm getting power onto the plug that's going to fit into the camera. Park lights are on, and let's check if we've got some voltage coming through. And that says 11.4 volts, which is fine. The working voltage range for the camera is 10 to 15 volts, so 11.5 volts is fine. Now that we've done that, we can push this back through over here with the rest of the wiring, and then we can assemble this socket for the trailer again. So I'm going to pop this baby back on with those 3 bolts that I took off earlier. The reason for putting the camera approximately in place is just that I can run the wiring from the camera all the way to the front of the car where I'm going to install the screen. So this is the AV line that comes with the camera. It's approximately 6 meters long, which should be more than enough for me to get from here and wire through, get into the cable rack and go all the way to the front, come under the dash and then plug it into the screen. And the way I'm going to do this is by following the existing set of cabling that's in place for the trailer. So this is another advantage of using this as my camera mounting point. Right, safety goggles on. Okay, so I've run the cables that come from the camera as they're attached to the trailer socket, and they are basically running along that trailer socket set of cables. And this is not very neat right now, so I'm going to have to come back and neaten this out as well. I don't like the way these cables are hanging over there, and I'd like them to be closer to the body and more secure. But in any case, basically those cables for the camera are just tracing along with the cables for the trailer socket, and that's going to go all the way into the car, and I'll show you how that gets into the body a bit further on. Right, so what you see over here is the blue AV cable, and then that goes through that little seal over there and into the body of the vehicle. Right, so let me show you where that AV cable runs. So I pulled out all the panels here, and I've threaded that AV cable through over here along the body of the car with the rest of the cable trunking for the rest of the electrics for the back of the car, and that then runs down and into a cable tray which is under the carpet over here. So I basically threaded that through, and then that goes through to the front of the car. Coming to the front seat now, there's my AV cable over there running inside this cable rack here, and that goes all the way through to the footwell, which is at the front over here. You can see it running up over there. It then basically goes underneath and up through into the footwell and runs across past the condenser for the air conditioner, and I'm going to connect it up, as you can see there, through onto the lighter socket for the car that will provide the 12 volts for the camera. So that's the screen over there, and basically we've got the cable from the screen that's running through and connecting up with our AV cable that's coming from the camera. So that gives us our video feed. And in addition to that, we've got power that is feeding to the camera and also to the screen, and I'm going to connect that up to the lighter socket over there, which will give us 12 volts, which will power both the camera as well as the screen. The wiring is pretty simple, so I'm not going to go through all of that. That's maybe a little bit of waste of time, but just follow the instructions. It's pretty straightforward. Now, what I really want to get to is what is the quality of the image that we're going to get from that camera at the back, and that'll depend on how good the camera is as well as how good the screen is. So we may not know whether it's the screen or the camera if the quality of what's coming out on here is not great, but let's give it a go. To get power to the screen, we've just got to turn the ignition on, which I've done now, and that will give us power to the screen. Okay, so as you can see, the screen is on, so that's fine. We've got power going to the screen. However, there is no signal, so we've got that blue screen right now, and we need to turn the taillights on in order to get the camera switched on. And put the lights on, and hey presto, we've got a nice image on the screen there. It's not all that clear. This is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Johannesburg on a winter day, so the light is pretty good. The light's not bad at all, and I would have expected or hoped for a clearer image than what I see on the screen now. So you can, for example, see the dogs walking backwards and forwards behind the car, behind a fence, but still it's not really that great. You can't really make out a lot of detail. I suppose this is not really a fair test because we are stationary right now, and it's probably better to see this with the car moving and maybe with the clearer space behind the car. So I think what we need to do then is take the car out on the road and then perhaps do a more objective review in terms of the intended use of the camera. So let's see how that goes. So far, I'm not so impressed with the image quality, but I suppose the proof of the pudding is in actually using it as it was intended. So we're finally getting to test the camera. So driving out with the lights on so we can see what's in the rear view, and I must say it's working pretty well. I was a little bit worried at first with respect to how good the camera was, but now that we're in nice bright daylight, it actually works really well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been pretty cool making it. It's been pretty cool doing this little project as well. Give me your comments below. Let's see what your experiences are and what you think about the way I went through with this here. I know it's a pretty sort of straightforward little jobby to do, and it doesn't require any great amount of skill, but it'd be nice to hear what other people think as well.